My name is Nick Dalton. I am completely ordinary in every aspect. Well, I guess you can call me a bit short and thin. My motto, which I haven't expressed throughout my life, has been, don't go with the flow. My life was quiet, average, and perfect for me. I didn't make much money, but I managed somehow. I had a good job, though it didn't inspire enthusiastic jokes at parties. I dated several women, had serious relationships with even fewer, and eventually married a woman named Kelly. She became my wife, and only with her did I feel special. Don't get me wrong, I didn't have a philosophy of, live for yourself and let others live, not at all. But even I admit that it's nice to win the championship, to earn an award. That's how I reacted to marrying Kelly, and after our years together, she still makes me feel like a gold medalist in a relationship. One peculiar snake that slithered into my garden was another employee of my company, Jack Ness. While I worked in climate control, he worked in the reception and delivery department. He was everything I was not: tall, well-built, attractive, and completely self-centered. From what little I've learned over the years working in the same place, he had once played sports in college or something like that. Those days were behind him, but he worked to maintain his physique and attitude. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you're the only one not buying into someone's nonsense at our company? Everyone, men and women alike, seemed to hang on every word Jack said. People laughed at his jokes, guys rallied around to cheer him on when he boasted of his exploits, and he shamelessly flirted with all the attractive women in the office, married or not. Plus, he could go to lunch whenever he pleased and finish work early without fear of repercussions from management. Well, you get the general idea by now. All that time, I wondered how each of these generally intelligent people could fall under his spell. Of course, those things were annoying, but I don't want to give the impression that I was obsessed with it. It's just an observation. I stood my ground, did my job, and went home to Kelly. Jack and I never crossed paths at work, so I kept quiet. After all, I didn't want to cause trouble, so I don't understand why Jack decided to target me. Maybe he noticed that he wasn't making the right impression on me. Perhaps he was right for the classic bully-victim relationship, but he was coming after me. It all started small, with little things like when the guys egged each other on, making fun of my height and size. There were rare occasions when I needed to go down to the loading dock for paperwork, and he would ask if I needed help getting it off the table or something like that. His entourage laughed, and I laughed, playing along with him and making it clear that I wasn't paying him any mind. For some reason, Jack Ness decided that Nick Dalton was his new source of entertainment at work. It didn't take long before I became Nicky's baby. Yes, this nickname had been applied to me occasionally in my youth, but now I was being called that at work, where grown professionals congregated. Sometimes, in the presence of superiors. Looking back, I realized that my usual tactics actually worked against me, but it was a lifelong trait that couldn't be overcome at once. Plus, I thought that if I confronted him, he would laugh it off and pat me on the shoulder, saying he was just joking. If I had gotten angry enough to file a complaint, it's unlikely anything would have happened to the golden boy. Don't forget, whether I was wrong or not, I still didn't believe I was weak. I was convinced that I hadn't crossed the threshold beyond which I should start taking action. Perhaps, looking back, I am partly responsible for the events that were about to unfold, creating the conditions in which the seeds could take root. All of this had been going on for several months when Jack decided to escalate the situation. They brought me a package of important documents from another office. Jack noticed my name on the package as he passed by the mail cart and decided to deliver it himself. Don't yawn, Nicky, special delivery. That was the only warning before the overstuffed envelope crashed onto my desk, spinning and then falling to the floor, knocking over a double-folded photo frame. There were 2 pictures in it. My wedding photo with Kelly and her posing on the beach in a bikini from our last vacation. Since it landed on my desk, and Jack tossed the package partially for him, he quickly picked up the fallen photo frame. "Hey, Nicky, my apologies," Jack said with a malicious smile on his face, insincere and condescending in tone as he straightened with the photos in hand. I made the most aggressive gesture towards him that I had made up to that point, trying to snatch them away, but he easily dodged and turned to look at them. He looked my wife up and down with an approving smile. "Not bad, Nicky boy. I can't imagine how you managed to keep her." Since it was just the 2 of us this time, I felt much less playfulness and more genuine disdain in his tone. Similarly, I didn't force a smile. After staring at someone else's wife for too long, He casually tossed the double frame onto the package and headed for the door. "Send this mare over so I can ride her a bit. A wild one like her will toss you off anytime. I'd be doing you a favor," he sneered over his shoulder. It seemed to me that, for the first time, something inside me was beginning to tighten. After that, however, nothing special happened. In fact, the relationship between Jack and me was as quiet as it had been before all this began. Too quiet, I should have thought. I was glad to have eased the tension and believed that my personal philosophy had weathered this storm and could set sail again. Shortly after, the company's annual summer picnic took place. I had just arrived in the parking lot and was watching Kelly check her hair and makeup one last time in the visor mirror. It was one of those small moments when you fall in love with a person all over again. I sat there, thanking the Almighty, gazing at the vision of my wife when she noticed me looking. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Should I even know?" "What? I just thought it was time for us to go on vacation again." "Really? Is that all?" she replied. "Maybe deep down in my heart, I'm thinking of that day in my office somewhere warm and sunny with a beach. Maybe we'll buy you a new bikini, or we could even go somewhere where you don't need it, haha. Would you like that?" I playfully stroked her hand. "Let's go with that." She got out of the car, and I followed. My good mood was short-lived. Jack Ness arrived, in his own way, but that didn't stop him from gathering a crowd around him. There was always a group of guys around him, laughing at any nonsense he spouted. I managed to keep Kelly and me at a comfortable distance while we ate barbecue and socialized. However, I noticed my wife glancing over at a group of people from time to time and clearly curious about what was going on there. My luck was about to run out. Jack, of course, stationed himself by the drinks, and at some point, we had to refill. I did my best to carry our drinks going literally back and forth, noticing Kelly's reluctance to move away from the drink area. I almost breathed a sigh of relief when she noticed me. "Hey, little Nicky," he yelled, stopping us in our tracks. "Does your mom know you're secretly drinking beer?" There was an immediate burst of laughter from our colleagues around us, as well as from the guests who didn't know any of us until today. "Come on," he said, approaching us so that our size difference was obvious. "I'll have to see some ID before letting you take her away." There was another burst of laughter, but I hardly paid attention. The reason was that this time, another laugh joined the mix, my wife's laughter. The sound, which had been as crystalline and angelic as I practically lived for, now sounded as sharp as a beginner musician trying to play the clarinet. I couldn't help but look at her. I wasn't the only one who caught the sound, and although I'm sure up to this point I had been staring at her summer dress's modest neckline more than he had, Jack expertly pretended to notice Kelly for the first time. "Well, hello there, I know you. You're that beautiful woman with good taste in swimwear," he said with a twisted smile. "Sorry," she replied. Her tone betrayed her surprise at her audacity, but suspiciously, there was no anger in it. In fact, there was a hint of a smile on her lips. My heart pricked. "Yes, Nikki likes to show you off to the guys, shows them all a picture of your incredible figure. I must say the photo doesn't do you justice." "Really?" Now there was anger in her voice. But it wasn't directed at Jack. Her annoyance at his little harmless lie was nothing compared to the storm raging inside me right now. I admit I was more than irritated that she seemed to immediately believe the lies of a man she had never met, especially because it went 180 degrees against what I was doing. In fact, everyone here knew that if they hadn't been personally seated at my desk, they hadn't seen this photo, but not a single soul told him he was talking nonsense, and if I started denying it, I would seem fake, whiny, and self-centered. I was trapped, but my fury was primarily directed at Jack Ness. My face flushed instantly with anger and humiliation, as if I had been burnt under the sun for 6 hours. This jackass couldn't count all his fingers and toes without a calculator, but at the same time, he easily manipulated everyone around him, including my wife and therefore, me. He still wore those glasses. Why did no one else but me see him for what he really was? His eyes were fixed on her. Now he was looking at Kelly, and his body language didn't go unnoticed. It said I wasn't there, but his words were meant for both of us. "I'd like to take you out sometime, that's it. If you ever manage to free yourself from the responsibilities of taking care of the kids." Laughter rang out again, though more awkwardly and disconnected. After all, at least some of my colleagues had some decency. My wife, on the other hand, covered her mouth in shock, but her cheeks betrayed a mocking smile, and her eyes sparkled. I saw it at that moment. I thought I didn't stand a chance, definitely had no support, especially where I should have had it. Suddenly, I lost the desire to drink, eat, or celebrate. I declined the beer and headed for the exit. I began walking, took Kelly's hand in mine. For a brief moment, she resisted the force pulling her before some part of her brain kicked in and she followed me. Maybe she simply didn't expect a sudden departure, but I took her resistance as another mini betrayal and let go of her hand like a hot potato, even before her legs began to move. I strode forward with determined but unhurried steps, vaguely aware that Kelly was making typical excuses to the crowd before following me. Jack called after me, "Hey, come on, Nikki. I was just kidding, don't be a monster." God knows I wouldn't want to cross you for anything. This caused even more laughter, including Kelly's laughter, whose beginning I heard before it stopped. She simply couldn't help it. For a moment, it occurred to me that, for once in his life, Jack might wonder if he had gone too far, but no, that would require self-reflection he didn't possess. Even if by some miracle he did, his pride would demand that he stay true to himself to save face. I walked a distance and sat down on a picnic bench, staring into space. Kelly stood just behind me, observing the drama on my face. I could feel several emotions boiling within her, taking turns dominating her thoughts. Finally, she spoke. Was this demonstration really necessary? I looked at her incredulously. I mean, your friend put you in an awkward position, and yes, it was rude, but he was just joking, it was obvious. He probably does it a lot. I got up slowly and looked at her face. My friend, well, never mind, I don't know, she decided to change tactics. Hey, if you don't want guys flirting with your wife, maybe you shouldn't showcase the product to your colleagues. I could only slightly shake my head with closed eyes and deny her several times, frustrated. Kelly completely misread my body language. Look, why don't we go and sort this out? I'm sure we can all gather, exchange apologies, and understand that it was just a simple misunderstanding, she said, pointing her thumb back to where we came from. I thought for a moment before responding. No, thank you, I understood everything perfectly, and my day, anyway, is ruined. I turned around and headed for the car. When I got there, I realized I had made this trip alone. I looked back and saw her in the distance at the drink table. I thought for a moment, biting my tongue as my vision was clouded with red. Then I got into the car and started it to turn on the air conditioning. I stayed for a while studying the manufacturer's logo on the steering wheel while the interior cooled down. Although my anger wasn't cooling down, in the end, I told myself, I've had enough, and I put it in reverse. As I began to drive, I heard a knock on the passenger window. Kelly was standing there, showing me a gesture. What are you doing? I reversed the car back into the parking lot, the doors unlocked, and my wife got inside in a fit of irritation. What's your problem? I just came to offer our apologies, and Mr. Ness was kind enough to apologize too, she said apologetically. Why is this guy a first-class jerk? There were many things today, but when it comes to him, there was nothing atypical. Wait, Mr. Ness. Kelly was surprised for a moment because I repeat, never say that. It should have been a warning sign for her, but she overlooked it because the 5 minutes she spent with him told her otherwise. Then she briefly blushed at the name of her new acquaintance, but then, in a subconscious attempt to stay on top, she returned to feeling angry. Great, I tried to do the right thing, but you decided to attack me. I can't believe you're behaving like this. I never thought you'd be so childish. Do I really have to take care of you, huh? I have no idea what was reflected on my face, but whatever it was, it left her speechless. She stepped away but didn't apologize, apparently believing that I should apologize. The trip home was silent. Of course, I was lost in my thoughts, and I assumed she was too. But the only time I ventured to look in her direction, I saw a faint reflection of her face in the window. It was faded, but there was a smile on her face. As much as I didn't deserve Jack Ness to enter my life, I didn't deserve my life partner taking his side. The next workday after the picnic, Jack tried to publicly accept my apologies, which I never presented. I barely caught the thinly veiled mockery, but now, for a different reason, I wasn't loose anymore. I locked myself in stone for the first time in my life. I wasn't going with the flow. Now there was resentment in me. His comment was just thrown onto the general heap. I arguably had a kind of crisis of faith for the first time in my life. My lifelong defense mechanism failed me. I found it difficult to deal with this, which is understandable. The more I thought about my wife, the worse the taste in my mouth became. Supposedly, in a few days, the man should rethink and apologize, but I had nothing to apologize for, and winning Kelly's forgiveness was impossible. In fact, not even getting an apology from her interested me. I realized I didn't care. Weeks passed, and there was calm on the front again. I didn't hear a sound from Jack at work, but I noticed his wolfish smile when he thought I couldn't see. My new focus was also on work. Nobody talked to me in the office unless it was about work. I felt their discomfort around me. I felt their pitying looks. I started to hate them all. My boss assigned me challenging tasks and thought he was doing it subtly enough for me not to notice. I thought it was all rumors received after my humiliation at the picnic, but that was just the tip of the iceberg. There was much more in the looks they threw at me, as I soon discovered. The final death of my old life occurred in the men's restroom in the main lobby of my company. I normally didn't use this place, but I became so withdrawn, resentful, and bitter with everything. I thought about how all this was consuming me from the inside. Looking at the dinner cooked at my table, I decided that if Jack could afford long lunches, then so could I. I tossed my lunch in the trash and headed for the main entrance, thinking that there's a high-quality steakhouse in the city center. On the way, I wanted to go to the bathroom and went to the restroom. I had just finished and was about to reach out to flush when two guys approached the urinals. They weren't exactly quiet, but they thought they were alone. I recognized them by their voices, but I didn't know which one was which, Mick and Gavin. Both of them worked with Cools at the loading dock and were a pair of lackeys. "Hey, are you sure you want wings? We have time to go get a steak," said the guy whose name I think was Gavin. "Only after payday. My wife will get rid of me," Mick replied. Apparently, Gavin chuckled briefly. Mick felt the need to clarify this statement. "Hey, not all of us can be Jacks. I still can't believe he's sleeping with Nikki's wife. What did he say? Rime. Do you think so? Is that arrogance even for him?" "Oh yeah, it is," Gavin said. "Since then, right after the barbecue, he practically picked her up there, told me he'd have her hooked by the next week. They meet for lunch. Do you think little Nikki knows?" Mick asked. "Who knows, buddy? And who cares?" They laughed, rinsed off. "They never noticed me." Well, how is that possible? My first reaction was at this moment when I learned that it's possible to be shocked without being surprised. Unlike the guy who was here a minute ago, I had no doubt that what I heard was true. It made a lot of pieces fit in my mind. But that doesn't mean that what I heard out loud didn't hit like a sledgehammer. The looks my colleagues were giving me now made even more sense. I finished my business on autopilot, not even paying attention to my reflection in the mirror as I washed my face. The only thought in my head was that I no longer had an appetite, and when my car left the parking lot, I wasn't going to the city center. If I had any doubts before arriving home, they would have dissipated when I saw Kelly's car and a van parked in the driveway that I could assume belonged to Kuwais. The neighbors are as aware of what's happening as my colleagues, I thought dejectedly. It still seemed strange to me. I should have felt devastated in all of this. Maybe I was, but the blue color of distress was completely washed out by the red of the anger of betrayal. My anger was a red-hot ember in the pit of my stomach. When I reached the front door, it struck me that I wasn't afraid of Jack at all at that moment. All my cognitive abilities were occupied with revenge. I had heard the expression, "seeing red," now I knew exactly what it meant. They were heard through the door, but as soon as I opened it, the sound became unmistakable. There was a brief walk on the carpet to visually confirm the reality of my marriage. Both of them were completely naked, so they decided not to hurry. From my position at the door and considering the position of our bed, I was mostly behind them but at enough of an angle to see their silhouettes. I've seen enough. I turned around and backed up against the wall next to the entrance, out of their sight. Not that I needed to be especially cautious, I was still furious, but strangely, upon seeing them with my own eyes, I sank a bit to the ground. I wasn't going to attack. I had to weigh my options. From somewhere deep in my psyche, my former self resurfaced. Wait, nothing good will come of this. You can't do anything without making the situation worse. Just go back and eat something, pretend you didn't see anything. But as quickly as the new me pressed, the old me retreated. You've stayed away from this all your life. Look where it's gotten you. I started thinking, looking towards the room. For a second, my gaze landed on the back of Jack's head. There was no doubt he was angry with my wife, but he started all of this. Kelly made the decision to betray me, but he's been pushing her since he saw her picture. As angry as I wasn't a fool. If I confronted him, he'd put me in a coma, and my sweetheart would probably laugh and go nuts watching what was happening. Then he'd tell the police that I was the one who attacked him. Even if I did hit him, he'd recover quickly. Maybe if I had a gun, a baseball bat, or maybe I have a crowbar in my garage, a good hit to the head might help, but it's possible I could kill him. I would be lying if I said I wasn't thinking about killing at that moment, and I didn't care about the consequences, but I knew I didn't want Jack Ness to die that day. I wanted him to regret his decision for a long time. In that moment, I saw the light. It wasn't just about me, it was about him, Jack Ness. He had a large balance on his karmic credit card. He had lived a good life, but today was the day of reckoning, and today he would face the consequences and regret it. Now I felt that my revenge was not only justified, but I was an instrument of justice. I had to balance the cosmic scales on Jack. So, what could I do? I was outnumbered. What do you do when you're physically superior? You need to outsmart your enemy. Granted, he's the kind of guy who can always find work as a fence post if deliveries don't pay. But what good is that to me? What else can I do? Come and ask him a math problem? No. I couldn't fight him, and my cunning wouldn't be useful at this moment. No, for that, I had to drive my enemy insane. I've been veering my whole life. My wife and Jack took advantage of this to betray me behind my back. It's time for a sharp turn. You might be surprised how long I've been thinking about this under the noise of the man I hated most in the world, sleeping with my former love in my own bed. In truth, my neurons were working so fast that these countless thoughts passed through my mind in nanoseconds to read and even more to write. This thought takes longer than thinking it. I silently descended the stairs. Not that I needed to be very quiet, but I wanted to make sure they didn't notice. I sneaked into the garage in the closet above the small built-in workbench. I took out my trusty and nearly full can of WD-40, then went back inside. I headed to the decorative fireplace, where Kelly kept her scented candles, and picked up the lighter she kept there. After finishing my preparations, I silently returned to the room. When I approached stealthily from behind him, luck was finally on my side. I noticed that Jack looked like a natural male, quite hairy, and obviously didn't believe in personal grooming. That was even better for me. When I was about to aim, his grunts became louder and more frantic. Although Jack probably thought that someday he might catch them off guard, maybe even hoped for it, he didn't seem to allow even the idea of me defeating him. I can imagine how he thought I would cry or shout for help. Maybe he thought I'd pounce on him and give him a chance to beat me senseless. Therefore, there was no doubt that the hissing behind him, then the oily sensation on his back, and the sudden sharp smell of every man's favorite lubricant outside the bedroom all seemed so alien to him at that moment that his brain couldn't even register it for a long second. Besides, he was on the verge of exploding. Which one? That was all he could say, turning around too late to avoid his hairy back being covered in oil, while he remained just as hairy in the front. Instinctively, he closed his eyes when a fine mist reached his face, which worked, but not before he saw me. I hope in that moment he had the presence of mind to understand what was about to happen to him. Now, maybe there was enough time to not take it seriously. After all, no one can be that crazy, right? I turned the lighter wheel and held it in front of the spray cone. The effect was so unexpected that it even surprised me slightly. The mist turned from a reliable lubricant into a flame jet 1 second later. The screaming began. It's true that his first priority was probably to hit the jar out of my hand. After that, he took a couple of clumsy steps towards me, waving both hands. His size was working against him as I dodged his punch. Now we switched places in the room, and I quickly resumed the massacre, mainly locating myself to make sure he didn't interfere. He crawled to the edge of the bed and curled up in a fetal position with wide open eyes due to shock and horror. The primitive lust instinct in her disappeared immediately when it was replaced by an even more primitive instinct: to get away from the fire. Since he was in a panic, he moved aimlessly towards our dresser, shouting incoherently and waving his arms. The idea crossed my mind that the room could catch fire, but there was nothing flammable in his immediate vicinity. As long as he kept moving, I didn't care either. It was fun to see the figure in flames lose composure. Obviously, he wasn't thinking clearly. I just found my wife in bed with another man, but the repressed one couldn't think clearly. After all, he was on fire at that moment. A thought struck me. If it were a movie or something, the protagonist would have a clever line ready. For the first time since it all began, I felt the need to say something. "Hey, Yaki, light up." Well, I wish I could have come up with something better, but it was in the moment. The main thing was that I wanted my words to be etched into his memory forever. Finally, some part of his gray matter worked. He fell to the floor and started rolling. Right after, I noticed the carpet was burning. The flames gave way to smoke and the air filled with a pungent smell. His agonizing screams subsided, turning into pitiful moans of agony. I realized someone was laughing maniacally, and then I realized it was me, and I stopped. Standing there, I wasn't angry anymore. I felt no anger or pain from the betrayal. All I felt at that moment was exhilaration, triumph over the enemy. I briefly examined my bedroom, confident there wouldn't be a fire in the house. Then I took one last look at Kelly. She turned pale under my gaze, fearing that she might be next, but I wasn't going to hurt her. When I turned to leave, I thought I saw remorse in her eyes, as if the scales of the past few weeks had fallen from her eyes. Well, now it's too late. As I made my way to the front door, the smoke alarm went off. I stood on the steps and casually tossed the WD-40 and the lighter into the yard before sitting down. A whirlwind of thoughts and emotions enveloped me in front of the door. Yes, I felt fear and uncertainty about my future, but I didn't have a drop of regret. That's it. I sat and waited. It was a good day. It seemed like a long time before I heard sirens in the distance. It turned out that in the near future, I had to sit and wait a lot. I offered no resistance to the police and didn't utter a word, except for brief confirmations that I was obeying while being detained and processed. I remained silent during the interrogation. I knew I didn't have to say anything, and it didn't make sense. There was no doubt about what had happened.